Kia ora, bula, kia ora na talofa, maloelele, and it's great to be here for another week of Tupalangi in a Piece and Easy pod. Dave, great to be with you again. My name's Glenn Murphy and I'm based here in Aotearoa, New Zealand. And Dave?
And ali'i, hello all geta. My name is David Dewar, currently based in Rarotonga, but previously based in Suva, Fiji. Glenn and I have been working together over the last 5 years, helping New Zealand, Australian and Pacific businesses understand and grow in this amazing part of the world. And it's fantastic to be doing so again in this weekly podcast.
And today we're going to be talking with Sristhi Narayan, who's the Chief Marketing Officer at Tourism Fiji and has been in that role for a few years. But Dave, what's been happening in your week before we get into talking with Sristhi?
Yeah, well, it's been a big week in Rarotonga this week, Glenn. I have just got back from a great catch-up with two good friends from Digicel Pacific. So a bit of a shout-out to Tomasi Ofa and Eltrina Yi, who I know from Suva and have been in Rarotonga this week for the Pacific Island Telecommunications conference that's been taking place here, bringing together representatives from all of the telcos across the Pacific region and, importantly, their suppliers, the likes of, Huawei and Telstra and all of these others. Well, Telstra, of course, owns Digicel in the region, but all of these other providers that are so critical in keeping the digital connectivity going. We've talked a bit about it on the show over the last few weeks, that digital connectivity, and things like cable infrastructure and Starlink, which, of course, are featuring quite significantly at the conference this week.
Yeah, well, that'd be great if we can get somebody from, say, a Digicel or one of the other participants at that conference to come and talk to us on the show and let us know what are the latest developments and what happened at the conference. Dave, I guess it's important this week to just acknowledge some really big news that's come out in the sporting scene. Not all good, unfortunately, with, of course, the news that the Drua head coach Glenn Jackson is departing early from his contract. And the other news, of course, is the Moana Pacifica news in the Super Rugby. And I'm certainly hopeful, I think, as many people will be, that the news that they won't continue in the competition actually changes and that somebody comes along and does buy the franchise. I'm very tempted for Tupalangi to try and put a deal together, Dave, if we only had the 12 million necessary, but yeah. What's your take on both those pieces of news?
Yeah, we can dream, can't we, Glenn? Thinking back to that conversation that we had with Josefa Vanuada, the head of sales for the Fijian Drua a few weeks ago, gave us a really good insight into just the mechanics of running a franchise. While on the one hand, you could see some of the secrets to how the Drua had been as successful as they were, you could also extrapolate from that some of the challenges that some of the other franchises might face. And I think we're seeing that with the issues that Moana Pacifica have highlighted in the last week with the funding issues that they've had. I mean, obviously they've had a single ownership structure with the Pacific Medical Association. They've been a lot more reliant, I think, in a relative sense, on some of those grants and other organisational contributions from the likes of World Rugby and other rugby associations, as opposed to the kind of wealth of corporate sponsorship that the Fijian Drua have been able to draw on. And I think that sort of highlights the challenge that they've faced being a franchise kind of with a multitude of homes, right? You've got the fact that they represent Samoa, Tonga, other parts of the Pacific, and are based in Auckland. At one level, that's quite valuable because you have some, potentially large supporter communities in those markets. But on the other hand, there's a real commercial dilution from that because it's difficult to attract perhaps the same sponsorship revenue and brand association that a franchise like the Drua can more easily draw on when it just represents a single market and a single country. So, and I think all of our listeners will agree with us that, I really hope that Moana can find a way to stay in the competition. As Sir Michael Jones said earlier this week, it's called Super Rugby Pacific for a reason. They're the team that, they're a team that people want to see, being successful. They had an incredible season last year. So, yeah, fingers crossed that there can be some kind of commercial solution for it.
Yeah, I picked up during the week in a conversation I was having that there were about a year ago, there were a couple of other buyers interested, but at that point, the PMA weren't quite prepared for the sale. So my hope would be that those buyers are still around and that there's still potential for somebody to pick it up. But the other alternative, I know you and I don't have the 12 million, Dave, but perhaps we could start a GoFundMe page or something, and we could still end up being in control of the franchise.
Well, stranger things have happened, Glenn. And you're right. I've seen similar references earlier this week on social media to some of the representatives of those previous consortia that have come out into the open and talked about their previous interest in the franchise. And yeah, look, it just illustrates, doesn't it, how important and connected the business side of running these organizations is to the sporting achievements on the field.
Yeah. And then the other one that was a little bit of a surprise to me, I don't know whether you'd picked up any rumblings earlier, but was, of course, the news of Glenn Jackson moving on from the Drua at the end of the season.
I understand it took, it came as a bit of a surprise to the Drua franchise as well. But look, Glenn's a great guy and has been a great coach and a good friend to us personally and to the show. Wish him all the best. Obviously, I'm sure there's all sorts of personal and professional reasons that he'll have for the decisions that he's made. And we've just got to wish everyone at the Drua, my team in the franchise, my team in the competition, as far as I'm concerned, all the best for the rest of the season. I'm sure there'll be no shortage of interest in people putting their hands up for that role.
Yeah, and I guess on that note too, just to say all the best to Glenn himself in terms of where he's going next. And it was, I thought, really lovely to see in the official announcement the acknowledgement of the contribution that he has made to the franchise. First as was the assistant coach, and then in the last couple of years as head coach. So we wish him all the best in whatever comes next for him.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess speaking of departures, that kind of brings us to our special guest of the week as well, Glenn, because I had seen earlier on LinkedIn, while we were talking about high-profile people announcing changes of career in Fiji, that a good friend of mine and someone who I've always respected immensely for the role that she's played in the tourism sector in Fiji. Had put up on LinkedIn an announcement that she would be moving on from her role with Tourism Fiji as the Chief Marketing Officer. And so I thought, my goodness, we need to get hold of Sristhi Narayan to pick her brain on everything that she's learned and achieved and delivered over the last 4 years with that incredible period of tourism in Fiji with that organisation. And what an opportunity it proved to be.
Awesome. And let's get into that Talanoa with Srishti then, Dave.
Sounds good. Let's go. Well, we've spent a lot of time on the show over the last few months talking about the incredible importance that tourism plays in the Pacific, and especially in a place like Fiji. And it's been an ambition of mine, I should say, over the last few months to get on someone, and especially this person from Tourism Fiji. And that person is Sristhi Narayan. Srishti is the Chief Marketing Officer for Tourism Fiji. I'm thrilled to have Srishti on the show, and particularly so because I saw on LinkedIn a week or two ago that she has some career news of her own. But first up, Srishti, thank you so much for joining us and welcome to the show.
Oliver Naka, coming to you live from the beautiful Fiji.
Yeah.
The other great connection that Srishti and I have is that she, like me, is from Wellington and has grown up and over there. And of course, I think we'll be possibly returning there at some point soon. Begin by telling us a little bit about your role and how it was that you came to be the Chief Marketing Officer for Tourism Fiji.
The story for me is I was actually born in Fiji and my parents moved to New Zealand when I was 5. So I grew up in Wellington and then I went off on what in New Zealand we call the OE, which is the Great Overseas Experience. At that point in my career, I was working in development. I was going through a want to change the world kind of phase. So I wasn't really interested in corporate life at that time. So I was working in community development. I was working for the government agency in New Zealand that deals with multiculturalism and diversity and the integration of different ethnicities. I ended up in Asia, living in Malaysia for a couple of years.
Wow.
And that was an incredible experience. And while I was over there, I sort of fell into the comms universe. And that was really the start of my communications marketing career. So on my return to New Zealand after my OE, I decided that that was the field I was going to explore. So over the next almost decade, was working in various marketing and comms jobs, mostly in finance and media and also creative agency side. But I had always retained a really strong connection to Fiji. I always felt a strong drawing to Fiji. So yeah, fast forward to 2022, I connected with the former CMO of Tourism Fiji on LinkedIn, and I saw that she posted a role that they were hiring for a marketing role, and she came back to me, and I just sort of said, love the work you're doing, and if you're ever looking for a marketer, I'd love to be considered. And she came back immediately and said, actually, I might have a role. She was looking for a succession role. A couple of interviews and a trip to Fiji later, I was offered the job, and I just knew I couldn't turn it down. So I came over to Fiji in August 2022 as the head of global marketing, and once my predecessor was ready to wrap up the role, and then stepped into the CMO role in May of 2023.
Perhaps a bit of a segue from the Drua, because of course this has been a week of some big announcements as well, and of course we've seen the news that the head coach of the Drua, Glenn Jackson, who's also a good friend of the show and of us personally, has announced that he'll be moving on at the end of the season. And of course you've had an announcement on LinkedIn as well, and I wonder if you're happy to let us know, or if you're happy for us to break the news about what that is, Srishti.
So I have decided, I've been at Tourism Fiji now coming up almost 4 years. And last year my partner and I welcomed a baby girl, and
congratulations.
life changes. Thank you very much. And I was just sort of feeling like after almost 4 years at Tourism Fiji and 3 in the CMO role, I felt like I had ticked off a lot of the things that I wanted to achieve while I've been here. We made the decision to head back to New Zealand so that our daughter can grow up near her grandparents. I have accepted a role with Stuff, but I think with the current state of the world, honest and accurate media is so much, more important than it's ever been. Luckily get to do it from Wellington and have the parents right next door. So yeah, looking forward to starting that in June.
Awesome. Well, if you look back at those 4 years with Tourism Fiji, what have been your highlights?
I had a couple of things that I really wanted to achieve. One was to build a really world-class team. I really wanted to establish Fiji as a really iconic island destination that has this really unique soul and culture, because that's the thing that people always talk about when they leave Fiji. Is I couldn't speak more highly of the marketing team here. They're just so talented, so creative, so resilient. If I look back at the body of work over the last 4 years, it's really incredible. There's stuff that I think people will look at and say, I can't believe an island destination like Fiji did that. One of the highlights for me has been rolling out our new brand positioning. People who in the past, had come to Fiji, parked up at a resort, had cocktails by the pool for 7 days and then left, were looking for something more meaningful. And they were saying to us, how can I give back when I'm in Fiji? I want to connect to local communities. We'd formerly had the tagline, where happiness finds you. And we moved into a tagline of where happiness comes naturally. And that's based on, we knew happiness is something, we've got a lot of equity in that. That is something that people say is unique about Fiji, is the joy and the warmth and the genuine happiness of the people. Fiji happiness is grounded in a culture that still values the things that we know from a scientific perspective drive true happiness. So that is community, connection, sharing, a deep connection to nature. I guess I'd call it spirituality, not necessarily in a religious connotation, understanding that there's interconnectedness and everything. So we completely changed the way that we position ourselves. We started to really bring our culture and our people to the fore. I think it's really beautiful and very authentic and honest to Fiji. And we've seen, we've received a bunch of awards for the work. And then the biggest thing is we've had record visitor arrivals over the last 3 years. And there's a huge amount of work across the industry to do that. But I certainly think the marketing has contributed.
I couldn't agree more. It was something that Jenny Sito also emphasised when we spoke to her a few weeks ago about the value that Fiji has in its people. The flow-on question from that is, was there anything in particular that has surprised you?
The first is I was absolutely stunned at the breadth of tourism experiences on offer. There is so much more to do in Fiji. I was really surprised at the amount of adventure activities, the amount of incredible food, incredible local chefs doing really interesting things with local ingredients, and applying modern technologies. And there's, these mountainous, lush rainforesty areas with the most stunning waterfalls. And then the other thing that really surprised me is the amount of community-based tourism happening here in Fiji. You just get an incredible taste of true Fijian culture because, it's all being run by local people. It's really unique, and it's really powerful as well because you actually see the benefit to the community of those experiences that they're running. You can see that both economically and socially, the value going back into those communities.
We've talked a lot about how Fiji tourism has grown and changed and expanded over the last 4 years. When you look at that, are you going to miss that?
Absolutely. It's very rare that you get an opportunity to be part of something, to not only rebuild, but then set it on another level of momentum. Now we're having conversations like, well, how do we avoid over-tourism? How do we protect the things that make us really unique? So it's been interesting to go from, we just have to get back up to a level to now be above that level we were aiming for and say, okay, now at which point, how do we take this but make sure that it's continues to be sustainable and protect Fijians. And
what advice would you be giving or thinking about for the next Srishti or the person taking over the CMO role at Tourism Fiji?
It is a really interesting time. It's a really unique time from a fuel perspective. Obviously, our national carrier, Fiji Airways, is being impacted. They have recently announced some adjustments to the frequency of flights from some destinations, and I think they will continue to do that. But at the moment, we've not seen a major impact on Fiji from a negative perspective. We can consider competitive advantages. So our relative distance from any sort of war zones, our close proximity to our core source markets of Australia and New Zealand. And there's a level of service and a standard of accommodation and experience that people can accept, that expect. It's really safe for families. Fiji has always been a standout destination for families. My advice for the next person coming into the role is to really double down on everything that we've said over the last few years is special about Fiji, playing up the fact that we're safe, we're known, we're accessible. We have this beautiful, warm, welcoming, inclusive culture. You're a guest in the country and everybody wants you to have a wonderful time. So for us, it's really about investing more in those markets, really making sure we have strong trade relationships in those markets, doing, great campaigns that are really compelling, and then supporting those with great offers via Fiji Airways.
And through your career, what are the changes that you've kind of seen in the way that marketing occurs?
It's just become more important to be across as many channels as possible. When I used to do campaigns 15 years ago, you'd have one social execution, one billboard, maybe one digital ad, and maybe one one email you were sending, maybe radio, maybe TV. And now you're doing that plus, retargeting. You've got your paid search, you've got, your SEO that you have to consider. There's so many channels, but they all have to be considered. I think the consumer is really savvy. So I think being an honest brand is really critical. It's really about, as a brand, finding what is the core of what you stand for and being absolutely obsessive about, holding on to that, but also being flexible in how you execute that. There's a lot more data. That means we can be a lot more targeted. I think you can also drown a little bit in data, and you can be bombarded with so many different things. So I think it's trying to be really clear about the metrics that make the most sense and leaning into those and not getting too overwhelmed by the sheer quantity of data available. You get all kinds of great metrics now from agencies, and it can get really overwhelming. So I think it's using the data, but using it in a really considered way. I think that the true sort of fundamentals of marketing haven't really changed that much. You still have to tell a really authentic story that's compelling. So it has to be culturally relevant. And when I say culture in that context, I don't mean the Fijian culture. I mean, what is happening in the world around us. People talk a lot about the marketing funnel and the marketing funnel no longer being relevant. But actually, while people don't purchase in a linear way anymore, it's still really important that they know the brand first. If they don't know the brand, they're not going to consider you. They might go and find out a little bit more about you. And at some point when they're ready to purchase, they're going to need a way to buy your brand. And those fundamentals I don't think have changed. I think it's just the channels that fit within each of those have changed. It's still very much about a story that resonates, getting people first to know your brand, getting people to love your brand, and then getting people to buy your brand.
What's the secret to success in your view?
Firstly is get familiar with and connect as much as you can with Fijian culture. You need to understand how Fijian culture works. People say Fiji time all the time, but what does it genuinely mean? It's not actually an excuse for being late. Here in Fiji, people prioritize a relationship over maybe getting to the meeting right on the dot. So they might bump into someone on the way. They're going to have the chat and then get to the meeting. So understanding how does time work in Fiji? How do relationships work in Fiji? How does business work in Fiji? From a business perspective, I think really understanding the gap you're trying to fill, and making sure there is a viable gap there. So some examples of companies that I think are really doing a great job is iBike Fiji, which is an e-bike company that does tours through different parts of the country. And, I think they've really understood the culture, they've identified this gap, and they've found the unique aspect of Fiji and connected all those together. And the other thing is, I think I'd say just have patience. We're a developing island nation. There's some processes that are still in development. Things take time. Sometimes it feels like we're working on this dual sort of time zone where things can take ages, but then once they happen really suddenly. So I think some people that are trying to enter the Fiji market, they may get a bit disillusioned and they, may lose patience, but I'd just say hang in there, because if you've got a great idea and you can really tap into relationships in the Fijian culture, once it does come to life, it can be really powerful and really successful. Um, There's also, you sort of think, oh, I need to get something printed, for example, and my deadline's tomorrow. Sometimes the things needed to do the printing aren't there. They've had to go to another company to pick up the materials or whatever. There's steps that maybe in a sort of Western developed environment, you might not have those steps. There is also an element of, just sort of that cultural ability to be present and in the moment. All over the world is now chasing the slowness and thing that people are trying to achieve. And it's been true for Fiji for millennia. Compared to life in some of the core markets that we work with, so Australia, New Zealand, USA, Asian markets, the European markets, there is sort of a frantic pace to life in a lot of those places. And there is an element of, you get to Fiji, as soon as you step off the plane, there's a little bit of an exhale. You hear the ukuleles in the airport, the palm trees are swaying. It just puts you in this slightly more peaceful, slower state. And we are seeing more and more people coming into the country and saying, I don't want to have an itinerary packed with 7 things to do every day. I've got my book. I've got these 3 places I want to go and try the food at. And other than that, I'm just going to just be present.
We are finishing up a conversation with Sristhi Narayan, who for the last 4 years has had a remarkable role as the Chief Marketing Officer for Tourism Fiji, and will shortly be finishing up and heading back to New Zealand. As someone who's kind of shortly coming to the end of this role and contemplating a return back to freezing cold, windy, but still beautiful Wellington, what do you really want to do before you head back?
My favourite part of Fiji has always been my grandparents' home, which is in a small town called Navua, and it's the house where I spent a lot of my childhood. It's the house that we've always gone back to. My grandparents have passed away, but my auntie lives in the house now, and we've been able to take our daughter there. And it's just a place for me that I go and all of the weight of the world falls away. And the other place that I would say that I hope we have a chance to take our daughter to before we wrap up our time here is the Asawa Islands. I just think the Asawa Islands are all of Fiji is stunning. But if you're looking for that unbelievable white sand, the stunning palm trees, and there's all these incredible sort of cliff tops in the Osawa Islands. The landscape is just jaw-dropping. The marine life is still untouched. You can see some of the most incredible coral you've ever seen in the world, incredible snorkeling.
Well,
What
I gotta say, you've obviously been in the right role, because just listening to you then is making me want to go on a holiday right now to the Asoa Islands. So,
Excellent.
yeah.
Job done.
Srishti, this has been just such a fantastic Talanoa. It's so cool to, hear about the role that you've done. I think you can be extremely proud of the work that you've done. Fiji's loss is very much New Zealand and Wellington and stuff.co.nz's gain. I guess, as we always say in Fiji, it's never goodbye, it's always sotatale.
Yeah, very much. Thanks, Dave, and thanks, Glenn. It has just been really the most rewarding time, and I've met the most incredible people. Ready for the next adventure now.
Yeah, look forward to welcoming you back to Aotearoa.
Thank you.
We've been talking to Sristhi Narayan, the Chief Marketing Officer of Tourism Fiji. Vinaka wakaleu.
Well, Dave, thank you for setting that Talanoa up with Srishti. You told me what an amazing job she's done and what an incredible person she was. I always believe you when you say that, but I think you still, she was still above the expectation that you'd set for me. That was incredible. And her knowledge and her commitment to what she's been doing just shine through, right, in that whole interview.
Yeah, I'm glad I still have the capacity to surprise positively, but it shouldn't really be a surprise. When you see just how amazing Tourism Fiji's output and achievements have been over the last 4 years, not just in terms of the incredible tourism growth that Fiji's experienced, but really just in terms of how that organisation has been run, how its front-facing comms have been, how its marketing campaign has evolved, and really been up there with some of the most sophisticated marketing and impressive marketing globally. And Srishti and her team have been right at the forefront of that. And I think we saw in that Talanoa just how impressive an individual she is, and by extension, the organisation and team that she's been working with.
After we'd stopped recording that segment, Srishti also acknowledged the amazing job that was done by the previous CEO, just acknowledging Brent Hill's input. And, he's moved on. He's now, I hadn't realised, but it was great to hear her say the role he's got as head of marketing for the Brisbane Olympics. What an incredible job, and I'm sure he'll be amazingly successful. But just acknowledging the job. And I know he was a friend of yours when you were in Fiji. And, I met him on a number of occasions and was always impressed by by what he was doing.
Yeah, absolutely, Glenn. And massive shout out to Brent. I miss him. He was a good mate in Fiji. Still, he's from Adelaide, as is my in-laws. So still have an opportunity to catch up with him and Kelly and the family back there. But yeah, you can see on social media and LinkedIn just the impact that he's already having in his new role with the Brisbane Olympics. And Srishti was very right as well to acknowledge it, because the passion, the intellect, and the work ethic that Brent brought to that role, man, you'd be hard pressed to find anyone who worked harder. Huge shout out to Brent, and yeah, what a cool Talanoa with Srishti. What was your biggest insight that you sort of took away from that conversation with her?
I was kind of listening on two levels, I guess, Dave. One was just about the Fiji situation, but also, about the marketing profession and sort of what businesses can learn from her approach as a marketer. I think there in that latter piece was something that I totally agree with her. Like the tools and the way that marketing is applied has moved a lot and modernized, but actually the fundamentals of what you do in marketing are still actually very similar to, what they were 15, 20 years ago. And I think she sort of summed it up by, she talked a lot about authenticity, having, really knowing what you're about, making sure that your potential buyers are aware of you, and then making sure that they know how to learn more about you, and then finally that there's a way for them to buy your brand. So, quite simple, fundamental stuff that's still really relevant. Despite all the modern tools and social media connections and those sorts of things, but the fundamentals are still the same.
I couldn't agree more with that. That was an insight that someone, I've got no background in marketing, obviously, but having a narrative and a story to be able to tell consistently that speaks to those core values was, and I think also gives you a bit of confidence that even though technology may be evolving very significantly, there's still a role for that human understanding and connection. Even in a hyper technological type industry like that. And I think the third takeaway I took from it was, how cool is it to see that Fiji in the Pacific is really at the forefront of some of the most sophisticated and impressive and up there with the most impressive marketing campaigns and leaders globally. What a great asset that is, not just for Fiji itself, but actually for the region to look at and learn from.
So, Dave, that was the Talanoa with Srishti, and lovely to have her on the show. What else is happening this week?
Yeah, well, I guess obviously we started the show talking about the Pacific Island Telcos Conference, and I think, that highlights another of the themes that we've been talking about over the last few weeks, and that growth of digitization and in the communication space across the region. And as we said at the start, we'd love to feature, anyone from the show that was at the conference from Digicel or, even many of the other providers that were there. And I guess it ties into another thing that happened this week, which is, of course, or last week rather, was the visit to New Zealand, the inaugural visit to the country by President Serangel Whips from Palau. President Whips had, by all accounts, a very successful visit to New Zealand. I understand he had a great roundtable meeting with some of the New Zealand business leaders that have done a bit of work in Palau. But Palau, of course, has been a real leader in the region in, digitizing its economy, in looking at ways that it can improve its ease of doing business, open up to, some of the new technological innovations that are possible in a smaller island country. And, New Zealand and Australian and Pacific businesses have been heavily involved. Alongside those from the United States, being a compact state, that's where most of its economic connection comes from. But some really interesting innovations in that part of the world. He's, of course, hosting the Pacific Island Forum this year, so we'll see plenty more of Palau later in the year.
And I noticed, Dave, too, there was some discussion about Starlink, and it was something that you actually highlighted when we did an episode where we talked a lot about Papua New Guinea a couple of months ago, and that whilst things like Starlink appear like a terrific answer for Pacific nations, actually there can be a little bit of a problem, because if they've already made significant investments in non-satellite technology, they first of all kind of need to get a return and to pay back any debts and things they have around that technology before they can go to a new one. And that is the situation that Palau has, I think.
It's the situation that a lot of Pacific Island countries, markets, and governments are all grappling with at the moment. It's a real dilemma, right? You've got a massive disruptor in Starlink that's offering a solution to what's been a massive, long-standing challenge and barrier to businesses and to people across the region in a world that increasingly requires that. And everything it unlocks. But by the same token, it's sort of the only business offering that. And I guess there's, the Pacific is very experienced, not in a good way, with the risks of monopoly providers and, of individual players and businesses getting too much commercial power and what they then do with it. And so I think there's a little bit of trepidation out there in the region. On the one hand, people see the massive opportunity and advantage, and consumers are voting with their feet and their wallets and buying these things up. But by the same token, there's that understanding, I think, that you need to have a backup and a redundancy to give yourself options.
Yeah. On a global scale, I did note this week that Amazon are making quite big moves in acquiring technology and existing companies so that they can compete more effectively with the Starlink. So, certainly at a global level, I think we're seeing competition heat up in that space, and Starlink's clear advantage right now may not last for as long as perhaps people have thought.
Yeah.
Cool. So, look, been great to talk with Srishti from Tourism Fiji and get her perspectives on the Fiji tourism market and on marketing in general. And we, you've got the telecommunications conference going on, and we're hoping to have somebody on the show in coming weeks who can tell us more about what goes on there. We've had a very successful visit to New Zealand by President Whips from Palau, and that will be our show, Dave. So would you like to read us out?
I sure would, Glenn, and I'll take a leaf out of Srishti's book and try and market us as effectively as she's been marketing Fiji. And so let everyone know that they are very valued listeners, and we really appreciate all of the feedback that we've been getting from our audience on some of the speakers that we've been profiling and the topics that we've been discussing on the show. We really appreciate everyone reaching out, getting hold of us through either it's LinkedIn or WhatsApp or Viber or Facebook Messenger or any other of the ways that you can get in touch with us, or of course emailing us to our dedicated email address, which is 2.palangi, Palagi, @gmail.com. You can follow us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, or wherever you get your quality podcasts from. Please subscribe, please tell your friends, and let us know any other topics or people or feedback that you'd like us to profile on the show. Otherwise, this has been Tu Palangi in a Pesinesi pod for the week ending 18th of April.